The evening sun cast long shadows through the glass windows of Sterling Technologies headquarters. Most employees had already left for the day, leaving behind the quiet hum of vacuum cleaners and the occasional squeak of a mop against the polished floor. James Chen, the company's CEO, walked through the corridor leading to the elevator, his mind preoccupied with the day's meetings. At 45, he built his company from the ground up, turning it into one of the country's leading tech firms. His expensive suit and confident stride spoke of his success, but those who knew him well could see the lingering sadness in his eyes, a reminder of a loss he'd never fully recovered from. As he approached the lobby, something made him stop. The cleaning lady was mopping the floor with slow, methodical movements, her back turned to him. There was something oddly familiar about her, the way she moved, the curve of her shoulders. James felt his heart skip a beat. Could it be? He whispered to himself, so quietly that even he barely heard it. The woman must have sensed his presence because she turned slightly, just enough for him to catch a glimpse of her profile. The mop clattered to the floor, breaking the evening silence. James felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Those eyes, that face. Even with the years etched into her features, he'd know her anywhere. It was Michelle. The same Michelle who'd supposedly died 15 years ago in that terrible accident. The woman he'd planned to propose to, whose loss had nearly broken him. But here she was, very much alive, wearing a cleaning service uniform and standing frozen in place like she'd seen a ghost, which, from her perspective, maybe she had. Their eyes met for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by fear. She broke eye contact first, hurriedly picking up her mop with trembling hands. "Wait," James called out, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Please." But she was already moving away, pushing her cleaning cart toward the service elevator with quick, purposeful steps. The same walk he remembered from their college days when she'd rushed to her early morning classes. James took a step forward, then stopped. His mind was racing with questions. How was she alive? Why was she here? What had happened 15 years ago? The woman he'd mourned, whose family he'd consoled at a funeral with an empty casket, was somehow here, living and breathing. He watched as she disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the fresh scent of floor cleaner and 1,000 unanswered questions. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone, canceled his dinner plans, and called his most trusted private investigator. "Tom, I need you to look into something for me. It's urgent." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I need everything you can find on the cleaning staff working in my building, particularly a woman who—" His voice caught in his throat. "A woman who looks exactly like Michelle Wong." As he ended the call, James stood in the lobby, staring at the spot where she'd been standing. The setting sun painted the floor in shades of orange and gold, but all he could see was the ghost of his past, alive and real, mopping these same floors. He knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't rest until he understood the truth. Whatever had happened 15 years ago, whatever had made her disappear and assume this new life, he needed to know. Not just for closure, but because despite the years, despite everything, his heart had recognized her instantly. And that had to mean something. The steady rhythm of raindrops against his office window brought James Chen back to that fateful day in 2009. He sat in his leather chair, tie loosened, staring at an old photograph he kept locked in his desk drawer. The image showed two young college students, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke. His fingers traced the face of the woman in the photo, Michelle Wong, the same woman he'd seen mopping his office floors just hours ago. Their love story had started simply enough. They met during their final year of college, both studying computer science. Michelle was brilliant, always the first to solve complex coding problems, while James was the entrepreneur, already dreaming up business plans. They'd balanced each other perfectly, her practical mindset keeping his wild dreams grounded, his ambition pushing her to think bigger. "Mr. Chen." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, pulling him from his memories. "The investigator is here." Tom Wu entered the office, a thick folder under his arm. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said, placing several documents on the desk. Michelle Wong officially died on October 15, 2009. Her car was found abandoned near Pacific Coast Highway, right by Devil's Drop Cliff. No body was ever recovered. James remembered that day all too well. The frantic phone calls, the search parties, the police investigations. They'd found her car door open, her purse still inside. The authorities concluded she must have fallen or jumped into the churning waters below. But here's where it gets interesting. Tom continued, spreading out more papers. 3 months before her disappearance, her father, Robert Wong, was arrested for money laundering. He worked with some dangerous people, the kind that make problems disappear permanently. What most people don't know is that Michelle was set to testify against one of these organizations. James felt his chest tighten. She never told me about any of this. She couldn't. According to my sources, she received death threats. Not just against her, but against anyone close to her. Tom paused, letting the implications sink in. The woman you saw today, she's been living under the name Linda Park. She's worked for various cleaning companies across 3 states, never staying in one place too long. Until now. The pieces started falling into place. James remembered how distant Michelle had become in those final weeks, how she pushed him away when he tried to help. He'd attributed it to stress from their upcoming graduation, never imagining the real reason. There's more, Tom said quietly. The organization her father was involved with, they're still active. Most of their leaders are out of prison now. If they discover she's alive. James stood up, walking to the window. Below, the city lights twinkled through the rain, each one representing countless stories, countless secrets. She didn't die to protect herself, he whispered. She did it to protect me. The weight of this realization hit him hard. For 15 years, he'd mourned her, blamed himself for not seeing signs of depression, for not being there when she needed him. But all this time, she'd been out there, living a life of constant movement and fake names, working jobs beneath her brilliant capabilities, all to keep him safe. What's her schedule? James asked, not turning from the window. She works the evening shift, Monday through Friday, always alone on the executive floor. James nodded slowly. The same brilliant mind that had topped their coding classes was now cleaning his office building, probably watching from afar as he built his tech empire. How many times had she seen him without him noticing? How many times has she wanted to reach out but couldn't? One more thing, Tom added, pulling out a final document. She's been making regular donations to a coding education program for underprivileged kids. Small amounts, but consistent. She's been doing it under different names, but the pattern is clear. A smile touched James's lips. That was the Michelle he knew. Even in hiding, even while working minimum wage jobs, she was still trying to make a difference in her own quiet way. Thank you, Tom, he said, finally turning back. I need you to do one more thing. Find out everything you can about who might still be watching her. If she's been living like this for 15 years, there has to be a reason, and I'm going to find out what it is. As Tom left, James picked up the old photograph again. The young couple in the image had no idea what lay ahead of them. Now, 15 years later, he had a second chance to make things right. But first, he needed to understand exactly what, or who, they were up against. Linda Park, formerly Michelle Wong, kept her eyes down as she pushed her cleaning cart through the quiet hallways of Sterling Technologies. Her heart was still racing from yesterday's encounter with James. 15 years of careful hiding, of looking over her shoulder, and now everything could fall apart because of one moment of carelessness. She pulled out her phone and checked the encrypted message app she'd been using to monitor certain activities. No unusual movement from the people she'd been watching all these years. Maybe they hadn't noticed anything yet. Maybe there was still time to disappear again. As she cleaned the conference room windows, she caught her reflection, a woman in her early 40s, her once-long hair now cut short and practical, wearing a simple uniform instead of the business suits she'd once dreamed of. She remembered sitting in lecture halls, coding until dawn, dreaming of launching her own tech company. Now she memorized cleaning schedules and security guard rotations. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. It was too early for the night security rounds. She quickly gathered her supplies, but before she could leave, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "Don't run," James said softly. "Please." Michelle's hand tightened on the mop handle. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice rough from years of rarely speaking to anyone. "You need to forget you saw me." "Forget?" James stepped into the room, keeping his distance like he was approaching a frightened animal. I spent 15 years trying to forget. I couldn't. And now I know why. She risked a glance at him. He looked tired, his suit slightly rumpled like he'd been working all day, or digging into the past. Whatever you think you've discovered, leave it alone. It's better this way. Better. His voice cracked slightly. You're working as a janitor. You, who could code circles around everyone in our class, who had dreams of changing the world through technology. I am changing the world, she replied, a hint of her old fire showing through. Just not in the way I planned. Sometimes small acts of kindness matter more than big achievements. James took another step forward. I know about the coding program donations. Even in hiding, you couldn't stop helping others. Michelle felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. You don't understand. These people, they're still out there. They're patient. They wait years for the right moment. If they find out I'm alive, they'll what? Kill me. James spread his arms. I'm not that scared college kid anymore. I have resources, connections. I can help protect you. She shook her head fiercely. That's exactly what I was trying to prevent, you getting involved. Building this company was your dream. I couldn't let my father's mistakes destroy that. And what about your dreams? He gestured around the empty conference room. Was this worth sacrificing everything for? You're alive, aren't you? The words burst out before she could stop them. They showed me pictures of what they'd do. Told me exactly how they'd make it look like an accident. Said no security system could keep you safe. She took a shaky breath. So yes, it was worth it. James stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the tears in his eyes. Do you know what I did with my first major contract payment? I funded a scholarship in your name. For women in tech who've overcome adversity, he smiled sadly. Every year, I'd read their stories, thinking about how proud you have been. And all this time you were out there, watching from the shadows. Michelle felt tears rolling down her cheeks. I saw the scholarship announcements. Read every recipient's story. It helped knowing something good came from what I had to do. Let me help you now, James pleaded. We can fight this together. You don't have to run anymore. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 15 years. In some ways, he was so different from the ambitious young man she'd loved. More confident, more weathered by life. But his eyes still held that same kindness, that same determination to make things right. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I've lived with fear for so long, I don't know how to stop. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. He reached out slowly, offering his hand. Just don't disappear again, please. Michelle stared at his outstretched hand, her mind racing with all the reasons she should run. But her heart, her tired, lonely heart, had other ideas. With trembling fingers, she reached out and took his hand. What neither of them noticed was the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily, transmitting their reunion to someone else's watchful eyes. The next evening, James waited in his office long after everyone else had left. The city lights blinked on one by one outside his window as the sun set. He'd asked his security team to give Michelle, still known to them as Linda, access to his office. Now he just had to hope she would come. At exactly 8:30 p.m., there was a soft knock. Michelle entered, still wearing her cleaning uniform, her eyes darting around the room like someone used to checking escape routes. You can sit down, James said gently, motioning to the chair across from his desk. No one else is here. She sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. This is dangerous, she said, meeting like this. I've upgraded the building's security. Added new cameras, better encryption. He stopped when she shook her head. You don't understand. These people, they don't just hack systems, they buy people, guards, cleaners, even executives. Money talks, and they have plenty of it. Her voice trembled slightly. That's how they found out about my testimony plans 15 years ago. Someone at the courthouse sold the information. James leaned forward. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Michelle took a deep breath. It started when I found some strange transactions in my father's computer. He was doing accounting for what looked like a normal import company, but the numbers didn't add up. When I dug deeper, I discovered they were moving millions through shell companies. She paused, twisting her hands together. I was young, idealistic. I thought if I took the evidence to the authorities, I'd be doing the right thing. I didn't realize how deep it went. These weren't just criminals. They were business people, politicians, people with everything to lose. The threats started small. Missing mail, weird phone calls. Then one day, I found pictures in my apartment. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Pictures of you, walking to class, getting coffee, working late at the computer lab, along with very detailed descriptions of how accidents could happen. James felt a chill run down his spine. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you, she said with a sad smile. You would have wanted to fight them, and they would have killed you for it. You were already talking about your business plans, your dreams. I couldn't let them take that away. So you took yourself away instead, James said quietly. Michelle nodded. I planned it for weeks. Made it look like suicide so no one would keep searching. Changed my appearance, learned to talk differently, move differently. Been moving from city to city ever since. She looked around his office. Until I saw your company was hiring cleaning staff. I knew I should have stayed away, but I just wanted to see how your dreams turned out. James stood up and walked to a painting on his wall. He moved it aside, revealing a small safe. I've been doing some digging of my own, he said, pulling out a thick folder. Tax records, bank transfers, property deeds, all pointing to where their money really comes from. He laid the documents on his desk. They're not as untouchable as they used to be. Michelle stared at the folder, her face pale. You shouldn't have done this. If they find out. They're already watching, James said calmly. That security camera in the conference room last night. Its feed was being diverted to an outside server. My tech team traced it this morning. Michelle jumped up, her chair scraping against the floor. I have to go. Now, if they know I'm alive. Wait, James grabbed her hand. I have a plan, but I need you to trust me. Like you did back in college when I told you I was going to build the biggest tech company in the city and you actually believed me. She stared at their joined hands. I always believed in you, she whispered. That's why I had to protect you. Now it's my turn to protect you. He squeezed her hand. But we do this together. No more running. No more hiding. What do you say? For a long moment, Michelle stood frozen, torn between 15 years of survival instincts and the truth in James's eyes. Finally, she squeezed his hand back. Tell me your plan, she said. Outside the office windows, a dark car pulled up across the street, its occupants watching the lit window where two silhouettes stood close together. One of them reached for a phone, dialing a number. Sir, you were right. She's alive. And she's not alone anymore. The morning sun had barely risen when James's private security team reported the breach. Someone had tried to access Sterling Technologies' main servers overnight. The attempt was blocked, but the message was clear. They were making their move. They're getting bold, Tom Wu said, spreading out surveillance photos across James's desk. Black car outside your building every night this week. Men in suits watching the cleaning staff entrance. They're not even trying to hide anymore. James studied the photos while Michelle paced behind him. She'd been staying in a secure apartment he'd arranged, but the stress was visible on her face. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said. They're sending a message. They can reach us anywhere. A soft beep from James's computer interrupted them. A new email had arrived. No sender, no subject. Just an attachment. James's security software scanned it automatically, declaring it safe to open. Inside was a single photo. It showed James and Michelle in the conference room from a few nights ago, their hands clasped together. Below it, a simple message. Time to finish old business. Michelle's face went pale. I need to leave. If I go now, maybe. No. James's voice was firm. That's exactly what they want. To separate us, make us vulnerable. He turned to Tom. How many of their old network did you identify? Tom pulled out another file. At least 15 key players, including 3 former executives who just got out of prison. They've been quietly buying up small tech companies, building a legitimate front. But their real money still comes from the same old channels: gambling, money laundering, corporate espionage. James nodded slowly. And what about the evidence I asked you to gather? All here. Tom patted a thick envelope. Banking records, offshore accounts, recorded conversations. Enough to put them away for decades. But they'll kill to keep this quiet. That's why we're not going to keep it quiet, James said, opening his laptop. Michelle, remember that encryption algorithm you developed in college? The one that could hide data inside normal network traffic. She stopped pacing. The distributed packet system. But that was just a theory. I built it, James said quietly. After you disappeared, I couldn't sleep for months. So I worked on your ideas, refined them. The basic version is part of our company's security system now. Michelle's eyes widened. You mean? Every attempt they make to breach our system, they're actually helping us spread the evidence across hundreds of secure servers worldwide. He smiled grimly. The more they try to hack us, the more they expose themselves. A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. James's assistant stuck her head in. Sir, the FBI agents are here for your meeting. Michelle stepped back into the shadows, but James caught her arm. It's okay. I called them. He turned to Tom. Show them in. Two agents entered, a man and a woman in crisp suits. The woman spoke first. Mr. Chen, we received your data package this morning. If what you're claiming is true. It's true, Michelle said, stepping forward. And I'm ready to testify. Again. But this time, we do it my way. The male agent studied her. Miss Wong. We thought you were dead, that was the point. She squared her shoulders. But now I'm done hiding. Over the next hour, they laid out the plan. The evidence would be released in stages through multiple channels. Any attempt to stop it would trigger more releases. The FBI would coordinate with international agencies, striking all locations simultaneously. They'll still try to stop us, Michelle warned as the agents left. They've killed for less. James took her hand. That's why we have to move fast. Tom's team has everything ready. By this time tomorrow, it'll be done. He squeezed her fingers. One way or another, you'll be free. Michelle looked down at their joined hands, then up at the city skyline through the window. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were making plans, thinking they held all the cards. They didn't know they were already too late. 15 years, she whispered. I've lived in fear for 15 years. Maybe it's time they learned what that feels like. As if in response, James's computer beeped again. Another anonymous email. This time, the message was shorter. You have until midnight. James and Michelle exchanged looks. The final countdown had begun. The Sterling Technologies building hummed with tension as midnight approached. James and Michelle sat in his office, surrounded by computer screens showing security camera feeds from every floor. FBI agents were positioned throughout the building, disguised as cleaning staff and security guards. System check complete, Michelle said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. All evidence packages are ready for distribution. She'd spent the last few hours refining the code she and James had developed, making sure nothing could stop the automated release. Security team reports all exits are covered, Tom announced from his position by the door. If they try anything, we'll see them coming. James checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. The deadline was almost here. Part of him hoped they would try something. After 15 years of hiding in shadows, it was time to bring everything into the light. The elevator dinged softly. Everyone tensed. Through the security feeds, they watched as 3 men in expensive suits stepped out. The leader was a familiar face from the investigation files, David Liu, former CEO of the import company that had started everything. They're here, Michelle whispered, her face pale but determined. Right on schedule. The men walked confidently towards James's office as if they owned the building. When they entered, David Liu smiled like he was meeting old friends. Miss Wong, he said smoothly. Or should I say, Miss Park, you're looking well for a dead woman. Cut the act, James interrupted, standing protectively near Michelle. We know why you're here. Liu's smile didn't waver. Do you? 15 years is a long time. Things have changed. We're legitimate businessmen now. What happened in the past? Well, that's ancient history. Legitimate. Michelle stood up, anger overcoming her fear. Is that what you call threatening to kill innocent people? Forcing them to abandon their lives? You made that choice yourself, Liu replied coldly. We simply showed you the consequences of poor decisions, like the one you're making now. He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a phone. Our tech team is ready. One command, and every server in this building fries. All your evidence gone, along with your company's entire database. James smiled. You really think we kept the evidence here, in one place? For the first time, Liu's confidence faltered. Behind him, Michelle pressed a key on her laptop. Screens around the office lit up, showing news websites, government portals, and financial databases worldwide. The evidence is everywhere, she said. Hidden in plain sight, scattered across thousands of servers. Even if you shut down the internet itself, you can't stop it now. You're bluffing, Liu snarled, but his eyes darted between the screens. Am I? Michelle typed another command. Watch. Headlines began appearing. Global financial conspiracy exposed. International money laundering ring uncovered. Tech companies linked to criminal enterprise. Liu's face twisted with rage. He reached inside his jacket, but before he could move further, the office doors burst open. FBI agents poured in, weapons drawn. David Liu, the lead agent, announced, "You and your associates are under arrest." "You have no idea what you've done," Liu spat as they handcuffed him. "We have people everywhere. This isn't over." "Actually, it is," James said. "While you were focused on us, federal agents were raiding your offices worldwide. Your accounts are frozen. Your networks are exposed. It's done." They watched as the agents led Liu and his men away. Through the windows, more police lights were visible on the street below. Around the world, similar scenes were playing out as the evidence Michelle had hidden triggered a cascade of arrests. Michelle stood by the window, tears rolling down her cheeks. 15 years, she whispered. "All those years of running, hiding, looking over my shoulder." James wrapped his arms around her. "It's over now, really over." She turned to face him. "What do we do now?" "Whatever you want," he said softly. "You're free to be Michelle Wong again, to build the life you dreamed of." She looked around the office at the computers still displaying their victory. Maybe I could start by upgrading your company's security system. It could use some work." James laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "Are you criticizing my network architecture?" "Someone has to," she smiled through her tears, "just like old times." Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, witnessing the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, the darkness that had haunted them for 15 years began to fade away. 1 year later, the auditorium of Sterling Technologies buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of young women filled the seats, each wearing a name tag and clutching their application packets. It was the annual Women in Tech Scholarship ceremony, but this year was different. Michelle stood backstage, adjusting her blazer nervously. After years of wearing cleaning uniforms, the formal business attire still felt strange. James appeared beside her, touching her hand gently. "Ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I've never spoken in front of so many people before." "Just tell them your story," he said softly. "They're here to listen." The stage lights brightened as James walked out to the podium. The crowd fell silent. "Welcome to the 16th Annual Women in Tech Scholarship Ceremony," he began. "For 15 years, we've honored bright young minds who've overcome incredible obstacles to pursue their dreams in technology. Today, I'm honored to introduce someone who inspired this program, someone who knows more about sacrifice, courage, and perseverance than anyone I've ever met." Michelle stepped into the light, her heart pounding. 100 faces looked up at her expectantly. "My name is Michelle Wong," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. 15 years ago, I was a computer science student with big dreams. Then life took an unexpected turn, and I had to make an impossible choice." She told them everything, finding the corruption, choosing to protect those she loved, the years spent in hiding. As she spoke, she saw tears in many eyes, saw heads nodding in understanding. "For 15 years, I cleaned offices at night, watching others live their dreams while mine stayed locked away. But even then, I found ways to make a difference. Small ways, quiet ways, but they mattered." She gestured to the scholarship recipients in the front row. "Like all of you, I faced obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But here's what I learned. Our dreams don't die just because we have to put them on hold. They wait for us, growing stronger, until we're ready to reclaim them." James joined her at the podium, "Which is why we're announcing a change to our scholarship program. Starting this year, we're adding a new category, the Second Chance Scholarship, for women who had to step away from their tech careers and are ready to return. The audience erupted in applause. In the front row, a woman in her 50s wiped away tears, clutching her application papers. Life doesn't always go as planned, Michelle continued. Sometimes we have to take detours, make sacrifices, put others first. But it's never too late to start again. Trust me, I know. After the ceremony, Michelle and James walked through the building together. They stopped by the conference room where they'd first reunited. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real, Michelle said, looking at her reflection in the window. No more hiding, no more running. Just her, being herself. Want to know a secret? James asked, pulling her close. I had your office ready for months before we caught them. I knew you'd come back someday. She laughed. You always were stubborn about your dreams. Our dreams, he corrected. Speaking of which, he pulled out his phone, showing her the latest coding project they'd been working on together. Ready to change the world? Michelle looked around, at the building she now helped run, at the future stretching out before them, bright and full of possibilities. I've been ready for 15 years. Outside, the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope. In offices throughout the building, women who'd once thought their dreams were out of reach were writing new stories of their own. And in the conference room, where a CEO had once recognized his long-lost love-mopping flaws, two people who'd found their way back to each other were proving that sometimes the longest detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be.